Welcome to Bella's World, where real-life drama meets spicy secrets. Subscribe to never miss a new story.
I thought I deserved better. But the truth is, Mike did, and he finally got it, just not with me. It's not my fault that he proposed like he's poor and doesn't have an imagination. A chain restaurant? On a random Thursday? In front of screaming kids and drunk college students? Any woman with standards would have said no. I mean, if you're going to ask someone to spend their entire life with you, at least make an effort. Put some thought into it. Make it special. Not some amateur hour disaster that looked like he planned it 5 minutes before walking in. So, of course I refused. What else was I supposed to do? Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. Now let's get back to the story. The moment Mike dropped to one knee at Romano's Italian restaurant, I knew this was going to be a disaster. We were sitting at a wobbly table near the kitchen doors, surrounded by our entire friend group, who were all holding their phones up, like this was some kind of social media content opportunity, instead of what was supposed to be the most important moment of my life. The restaurant was absolutely chaotic that Thursday night in September. It was their college night promotion, which meant the place was packed with drunk 20-somethings taking tequila shots and singing along to the pop music blasting from the speakers. Kids were running around between tables while their parents tried to have conversations over the noise. Servers were rushing back and forth with heavy trays, occasionally bumping into chairs and apologizing over their shoulders. This was where Mike had chosen to propose to me. Not a romantic beach at sunset, not a cozy private dinner at an upscale restaurant, not even our own apartment where we could have a meaningful moment together. Romano's, where we'd had our first date 2 years earlier, and where the smell of garlic bread was so overwhelming it made my eyes water. I want to say something to the most amazing woman I've ever known, Mike began, his voice barely audible over the restaurant noise, as he stood up and started tapping his wine glass with a fork. The cheap wine glass that had water spots on it, because apparently this place couldn't even wash their dishes properly. Everyone at our table turned to look at him with expectant faces, and I felt my stomach sink as I realized what was about to happen. Mike was reaching into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small black velvet box that looked like it came from a mall jewelry store rather than anywhere that sold quality diamonds. "Lauren, you've made me happier than I ever thought possible," he continued, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead from nervousness. "I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else." That's when he actually dropped to one knee right there on the sticky tile floor, between our table and the booth full of college kids doing shots. He opened the ring box to reveal the most basic solitaire diamond I'd ever seen, maybe half a carat if I was being generous, in a simple gold band that looked like something you'd find at a department store. "Lauren Michelle Carter, will you marry me?" The entire restaurant seemed to quiet down for a moment, like someone had turned down the volume on all the chaos around us. Everyone at our table was holding their breath, phones pointed at us to capture what they expected to be a joyful moment. Mike was looking up at me with such hope and nervousness in his eyes, like his entire future happiness depended on my answer. But all I could think about was how wrong everything felt. This wasn't how I'd imagined getting engaged. I'd pictured something romantic and thoughtful and Instagram-worthy, not this amateur production in a chain restaurant that smelled like burnt cheese and industrial cleaner. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever as I stared down at Mike kneeling on the floor with his bargain basement ring, waiting for me to say something. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, could sense their growing confusion as the romantic moment started to feel awkward and uncomfortable. And then I laughed. It wasn't a gentle giggle or nervous laughter. It was a short, sharp bark of disbelief that cut through the moment like a knife and made everyone at our table freeze in shock. "Really? Here? Are you serious right now?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them, dripping with contempt and disappointment. "Mike, come on. At least make it look like a real proposal. This feels like some kind of joke. The expressions on our friends' faces shifted from excitement to horror as they realized what was happening. The college kids at the next table had stopped their shots to stare at our drama. Even the servers had slowed down to watch what was clearly about to become a scene. Mike's face went through a series of emotions that I'll never forget. Confusion first, like he couldn't understand why I wasn't crying happy tears and throwing myself into his arms. Then hurt, deep and raw, as my words sank in, and he understood that I was rejecting not just his proposal, but him as a person. Finally, something that looked like acceptance, like he was realizing something fundamental about who I really was. I mean, if you're going to ask someone to marry you, shouldn't you put some effort into it? I continued, unable to stop myself, even though I could see how much my words were destroying him. This is supposed to be special, Mike, memorable, not something that looks like you planned it in the parking lot. Mike slowly stood up from the floor, his knees probably sore from kneeling on the hard tile. He closed the ring box with a quiet snap that somehow sounded louder than all the restaurant noise around us. His voice was calm and steady when he spoke, which made everything worse somehow. "Okay," he said simply, putting the ring back in his jacket pocket. "I understand." He pulled out his wallet, left enough cash on the table to cover our entire bill plus a generous tip, and walked out of Romano's without saying goodbye to anyone. Just like that, he was gone, leaving me sitting there with a table full of friends who were staring at me like they'd just witnessed a car accident. The silence that followed was deafening. I tried to salvage the situation by making light of what had happened, suggesting we order dessert and pretend nothing had occurred. But nobody was laughing along with me. They were all looking at me like they didn't recognize the person I'd just revealed myself to be. "Lauren, what the hell was that?" my sister finally asked, her voice full of disbelief. "He just proposed to you, and you humiliated him in front of everyone." "He should have put more thought into it," I defended myself, feeling attacked by their reactions. Any woman would expect better than this. I'm not going to accept a proposal just because he went through the motions. But even as I said the words, I could see that nobody at the table agreed with me. They were all exchanging glances that suggested they thought I'd completely lost my mind. My best friend Ashley, who had been sitting next to me throughout the entire disaster, finally spoke up. "Lauren, he's been planning this for weeks. He was so excited to surprise you. He kept asking us what your favorite flowers were and what kind of proposal you'd want." That information hit me like a punch to the stomach. Mike had been planning this. He'd been thinking about me, talking to my friends, trying to make it special in his own way. But his idea of special and mine were clearly very different. And I'd made sure he knew exactly how disappointed I was in his efforts. The birthday dinner ended 20 minutes later with the most awkward goodbyes I'd ever experienced. People hugged me half-heartedly and made vague promises to call soon that we all knew they wouldn't keep. I could tell they were all going to go home and immediately start texting each other about what they'd just witnessed. I went back to my apartment alone, still feeling justified in my reaction, but also starting to worry about how Mike was handling the rejection. I kept expecting him to call or text to apologize for the public spectacle and suggest we try again somewhere more appropriate. But my phone stayed silent. The first sign that I'd miscalculated the situation came 3 days later when I tried to call Mike and discovered that he'd blocked my number. When I tried to reach him on social media, I found that he'd blocked me there too. Suddenly, I couldn't see any of his posts or stories, couldn't send him messages, couldn't even view his profile. It was like he'd erased me from his digital life completely. I started reaching out to our mutual friends to ask if they'd heard from him, but their responses were cold and brief. Nobody seemed to want to get involved in our drama, and several people made comments about how they thought I'd been unnecessarily cruel at the restaurant. "He's a good guy, Lauren," his friend Marcus told me when I finally got him to answer my call. "He didn't deserve to be embarrassed like that in front of everyone. Maybe you should think about what you really want before you try to contact him again." What I wanted was for Mike to try again with a better proposal. What I wanted was for him to realize that I had standards and expectations that needed to be met. What I wanted was for him to put more effort into showing me how much I meant to him. But as the days turned into weeks without any contact from him, I started to realize that what I wanted might not matter anymore. 3 weeks after the proposal disaster, I saw something on Ashley's Instagram story that made my blood run cold. She was wearing a grey hoodie that I immediately recognized as Mike's college sweatshirt, the one he wore every weekend while doing chores around his apartment. I stared at the photo for several minutes, trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe she'd borrowed it after spilling something on her shirt. Maybe it was a coincidence that she owned the same hoodie. Maybe I was reading too much into a simple social media post. But the next day, Ashley posted a photo from the movie theatre, sitting in the same row and section that Mike always booked when we went to see films together. The same theatre where he'd surprised me with tickets to see the new Marvel movie just 2 weeks before his proposal. My heart started racing as I scrolled through more of Ashley's recent posts, looking for evidence of what I was starting to suspect, but couldn't bring myself to believe. Coffee cups from Mike's favourite cafe downtown. A photo of her reading the same book Mike had been trying to get me to read for months. A sunset picture that looked like it was taken from his apartment balcony. I tried calling Ashley, but she didn't answer. I sent her text messages asking if we could talk, but she left me on read. I reached out to other friends in our group, but nobody seemed to want to discuss what was happening, or they claimed they didn't know anything about Ashley and Mike spending time together. Finally, after a week of mounting evidence and growing panic, Ashley went completely public with an Instagram post that shattered any remaining doubt about what was happening. It was a photo of her and Mike holding hands at the farmer's market downtown, both of them smiling genuinely at the camera like they didn't have a care in the world. The caption read, "Sometimes the universe knows what you need before you do," followed by a heart emoji. The comments section exploded with congratulations from friends who had apparently known about their relationship for weeks. People were calling them cute together and saying they were perfect for each other. Several comments mentioned how Mike deserved someone who appreciated him, which felt like direct attacks on me and my character. I sat in my apartment staring at that photo for over an hour, unable to process the double betrayal I was experiencing. Not only had I lost Mike, but I'd lost him to my best friend who had been sitting right next to me when I humiliated him at Romano's. Ashley had watched me destroy my relationship and then moved in to pick up the pieces. I finally worked up the courage to text Mike directly, swallowing what remained of my pride to send a message that said, "I didn't mean for things to end like this. Can we please talk?" His response came back within minutes. "There's nothing to talk about, Lauren. I'm happy now." Those 5 words hit me harder than any angry rant could have. Mike wasn't devastated by our breakup. He wasn't mourning the loss of our relationship or wishing things had gone differently. He was happy. He'd moved on completely and found someone who made him feel better than I ever had. That's when I truly understood that I'd lost him forever and that the loss was entirely my own fault. I started scrolling through our old text messages, looking for signs that our relationship had been doomed from the beginning. But what I found instead was evidence of how consistently thoughtful and caring Mike had been throughout our entire time together. Screenshots of concert tickets he'd bought months in advance because he'd remembered me mentioning a band I wanted to see. Photos of surprise flower deliveries to my office when I was having stressful days at work. Messages about weekend trips he'd planned to places I'd said I wanted to visit. Evidence of all the times he'd cancelled his own plans to take care of me when I was sick. The way he'd driven across town at midnight to bring me ice cream when I was crying about a fight with my sister. The surprise birthday party he'd thrown for me the previous year, complete with all my favourite foods and a playlist of songs that reminded him of me. Looking at these messages now, I could see that Mike had been consistently romantic and thoughtful in ways that I'd taken for granted because they weren't dramatic or Instagram-worthy enough for my standards. He'd been showing me he loved me every single day through small gestures and acts of service that I'd barely noticed at the time. Meanwhile, Ashley was glowing in all her recent social media posts. She looked happier and more confident than I'd seen her look in years, like she'd won some kind of lottery that she couldn't quite believe. Our mutual friends were rallying around her and Mike as a couple, commenting on their photos about how perfect they were together and how they brought out the best in each other. I started hearing whispers when I went to places where our friend group used to hang out together. People would stop talking when I walked into a room, or they'd make comments just loud enough for me to overhear about how Mike was so much better off without someone who didn't appreciate him. She really thought she was too good for him, I heard someone say at our usual coffee shop. Like, girl, he's a catch, and you're not all that. My direct messages on social media became eerily quiet. People who used to send me funny memes and random thoughts throughout the day stopped reaching out entirely. Invitations to parties and events dried up completely. I realized that in rejecting Mike so publicly and cruelly, I'd also lost most of my social circle. My apartment felt impossibly quiet and empty without the constant buzz of social activity I'd grown accustomed to. The silence was broken only by my own thoughts replaying that moment at Romano's over and over again, thinking about how Mike's face had looked when I laughed at his proposal, the hope draining away and being replaced by something that looked like resignation. I finally had to admit to myself that I hadn't been better than Mike's proposal. I'd just been cruel and ungrateful, and too focused on my own impossible expectations to appreciate what he was offering me. 2 months after the proposal disaster, I stumbled upon Ashley's latest Instagram post and felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. My fingers froze above my phone, heart hammering as I stared at the screen. There she was, glowing with happiness, holding up her left hand to flaunt a diamond ring. Not just any ring, the same solitaire that Mike had offered to me at Romano's 2 months ago. The caption read, "Third time's the charm." He finally found someone who says yes, followed by a trail of crying, laughing emojis. Her smile was wide, genuine. The ring sparkled brilliantly on her finger, expertly captured in what looked like a professionally staged photo. My eyes scanned the hundreds of comments. Former mutual friends gushed with congratulations. There were talks of bridal showers, wedding venues, and how thrilled everyone was for them. For her, I couldn't look away. That ring should have been mine. That life, that moment, should have been mine. But I laughed. I laughed at him in front of our friends, in the middle of Romano's Italian grill, and I crushed his spirit. Mike had knelt on that cold tile floor, his voice trembling with nerves as he pulled out the ring box. He looked up at me with those wide, hopeful eyes and said my full name. The restaurant had gone quiet. Our friends watched with anticipation. He asked me to marry him, and I burst out laughing. Here? Really? I remember blurting out, unable to stop myself. At Romano's? Couldn't you at least have picked somewhere a little less Olive Garden-y? The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. Mike's smile faded, his shoulders sagging. He looked like a man who had just watched his dream crumble before his eyes. I saw the hurt, but I was too caught up in the moment, too blinded by what I thought I deserved. I kept talking, criticizing, nitpicking. Maybe next time plan something a bit more, I don't know, exquisite? He quietly closed the ring box, stood up, and whispered something like, "I'm sorry I wasn't enough," before walking out. And just like that, everything we had dissolved in a single moment of careless arrogance. I thought he would come back, that he would understand, that he'd try again with a better proposal, but he never did, and now I know why. Ashley, my former best friend, the one who knew all my secrets, who had been there the night of the proposal, who had comforted me when I complained that I felt embarrassed. She must have seen her chance, and unlike me, she said yes. She probably didn't care that the restaurant wasn't 5-star or that the ring wasn't some massive custom-cut jewel. She saw Mike for who he was, a kind, loyal, thoughtful man who just wanted to love someone forever. And she cherished it. Now I sit in my empty apartment, surrounded by leftover decorations from a birthday no one showed up for. The balloons have lost their air, drooping like my pride. No calls, no messages, just silence. Even my phone is quiet, the only sound in the room being the hum of my fridge and the echo of my regrets. I go back to that night at Romano's again and again in my mind. It replays like a scene from a tragic romance movie I can't escape. I see Mike's face, hear the heartbreak in his voice, feel the stillness of the restaurant pressing in around us like walls closing in. And now he's planning a wedding with Ashley. He found someone who didn't scoff at his efforts, someone who didn't belittle the way he expressed love. The two of them look perfect together. In every photo, he beams in a way I haven't seen since our first year together. That hurts more than anything. Not just that he moved on, but that he moved on happier. I used to think I deserved more. I thought I was too special for a chain restaurant proposal, too elegant for a ring without a brand name, too worldly to accept anything but a fantasy-level romantic gesture. But now I see how shallow that was. Mike's proposal wasn't perfect by the world's standards, but it was sincere. It came from a man who loved me enough to make that moment happen, to gather our friends, to plan what he thought would make me smile. And I laughed. Ashley didn't. She cried. She hugged him. She said yes before he could finish speaking. And now the ring that was once meant for me is a symbol of their future. I lost Mike, not because he wasn't good enough, but because I didn't realize that he was already more than enough. I let my need for appearances ruin the best thing I ever had. And now I'm left alone with my memories, my shame, and a hollow space where a beautiful life could have been.
Subscribe to never miss a new story.